do. Wow. Well, good morning, everyone. Everybody quieted down quickly on a Friday morning. That's Thursday morning, excuse me. That's great. Welcome to University of Colorado, Denver. I'm Paul Teske. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Affairs here at CU Denver, and we're delighted to be hosting and co-sponsoring this event with A+ Colorado. I think we have the biggest and the best panel and audience that's ever talked about important DPS issues in all of human history. So it's a great event we're about to start, and I'm really excited to hear from our panel and hear from the audience questions and all the things that are going on. Of course, it's such a great honor to work with A+ Colorado, Van, Landon, Lisa, and the whole crew. They have 2 new reports out that we're going to hear about, I think. But they do a great job shining a light on the good things that are going on in school districts in Colorado and some of the challenges that we face, and hosting conversations and just doing that sort of critical friend work that is so important in education policy that we have as we face the issues we're going to talk about today in Colorado. One quick, somewhat shameless plug. We have a new program starting this summer in education systems leadership. Parker Baxter, formerly of DPS, and I are working on that. Van will be teaching in it, some other folks probably in this room. We're hoping to bring people from around the country to talk about sort of district level governance issues, reform issues, and those kinds of issues. We have a website, edsystemsleadership.org. If you want to know more about it, it's going to be held the last week in July. July 23rd here at the university. So if you're interested in that or want to learn more about it, please check that out. Most of you know Van. He's been head of A+ Colorado for several years now. Before that, headed the Odyssey School, worked for the Children's Campaign, worked for the Peña Foundation. He's probably the most quotable education policy reform person in the state, and does amazing work. So please join me in welcoming our panel and welcoming Van.
Thanks a lot, Paul, and thank all of you for coming. 7:30, braving traffic, finding a parking space, for coming. I also want to thank one of my colleagues, Lisa Birdie, for who we wouldn't be able to do this stuff if Lisa wasn't leading our research and policy work. So thanks. I also want to. We have a few elected officials here, so I want to thank. We have some school board members up here, so who are currently elected school board members. Raise your hands. And then I think I saw Jennifer Bacon somewhere in the back, who's currently on the DPS school board. And I think I see Representative Coleman in the back, also from Northeast Denver. So thank you for coming. Okay. I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over the reports. I'm going to try and do it very quickly. The reports are in front of you. They're chock full of information. And so feel free to go through those. We are also going to try something new this time. My colleagues who are in their 20s and 30s say this Twitter thing works in terms of questions. And so we will have a way for you to post comments and questions on Twitter. And you'll see it on the screen in just a second. And Landon will be collecting them and asking them at the end. So we'll see how that goes. I was arguing for white cards, but we'll see. Okay, let me introduce the panelists, and then I'll do the summary, and then we'll get right into the conversation. So I'll move this way, and we have Angela Cobián, Cobián from Southwest Denver, who is one of the newly elected school board members of Denver Public Schools. She also has had an amazing career for a relatively short period of time. Is a former teacher, has also served on the Colorado College Board of Trustees, and we're just grateful to have her on the board. Moving to her right, we have Dr. Nate Easley. Nate is also is a former board president of the Denver Public Schools, former head of Denver Scholarship Foundation, and is currently the head of Blue Schools Partners. So thanks, Nate. To his right, we have Barber O'Brien, who is currently the vice president of the Denver School Board, is formerly our lieutenant governor for the state of Colorado, and most importantly is my former boss at the Colorado Children's Campaign.
I was hoping you were going to get there.
So I will be careful. And last but not least, we have Teresa Peña, who is also a former president of the Denver School Board, and is currently an employee of Denver Public Schools and leading a lot of the improvements related to getting kids to have great food in the district. So thanks. So we've got a great crew. I'm going to get to them in just a second, but let me just give you a quick overview of these two reports. This is, by the way, the 6th time that we've done this. We started in 2011 in the fall with a start with the facts, sort of giving an overview of where is Denver Public Schools. So let me see that I have clicked here. So Denver's current performance. You see it's a big blue or teal dot in the middle. Basically, this is NAEP scores. Denver is basically in the middle of the pack when we look at urban school districts. And the horizontal line is the percentage of students that qualify for free or reduced lunch. And the vertical line is the percentage of students that are proficient on NAEP. And so if you look at this in different ways, we're roughly, at least on the NAEP stuff, around in the middle of the pack. If we look at the state test scores, we see over time, and we saw this with TCAP and CSAP, the earlier versions of the state test, that we see that Denver students are improving over time. And we now see this with CMAS, the Parkish test that we now have. And if you see from 2015 to 2017, you see that all of these lines are slightly increasing. The problem, of course, is that white students, the top line, they're increasing much faster. In this case, 6 points. And Latinx students and Black students are increasing at slower rates, in this case, around 3 points. So we've got giant gaps. If we look at the NAEP scores, Denver has one of the biggest gaps among those urban districts. And we also see giant gaps when we look at the state tests. What about when kids are leaving the district? Where are we? Well, again, if we break this down into different student groups, what we did was we took some state data. Again, thank you, Lisa. And we looked at the number of schools. This is from SAT scores, and we said, hey, what are the number of kids in the schools that have enough kids to do this sort of analysis that are ready for college level work according to the SATs? And we see there's a pretty big range. So if we just look, let's say, at Black students, we've got a little more than a third of the students on English and language arts, and a little less than a third for math. For Latinx students, we have a third, but we only have about 10% on math. If we look on white students, it's almost 90% in both areas. And if we look at low-income students, again, the numbers are about a third, a little less than a third, and then 8%. So we have some significant differences by both race and income They don't necessarily align, and they're different. Okay, so how long is it going to take for us to get to the 2020 goals? If we look at rating, and again, we break it down by different groups, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take about 30 years at this rate. If we look at graduation rates are easier to move. In this case, we're looking at, 2029, 2030. So a little more than a decade. So anyway, that's sort of overall district. Now, Denver is one of the top school choice districts in the country. Most families choose a school and have a wide range of choices in terms of choice. We were fortunate enough to work with Chris DeWitt, who also taught us a few things. We have he brought some biological research methodology to us, and so we were able to learn something about this Shannon Index. And so he helped us do an analysis of all the different types of schools in terms of educational programs and what their diversity is around the district. And so what we found was, and this is a complicated bar chart, but the vertical line is the number of seats. And on the horizontal, these are the different parts of Denver. So far northeast, near northeast, northwest, southwest, southeast. And then the different bars are different types of schools. So art-focused schools, college prep, dual language, experiential learning, schools focused on wellness. So in this study, we didn't spend 5 days in each school looking at whether or not they were doing these things. What we did was we looked at what all the publicly available data was around those schools and what those schools claim to be doing. So it's possible that there are schools that are wellness schools that aren't, and vice versa. So, but this was focused on sort of what the supply side of schools were. And not surprisingly, there's a wide range, and there's also a wide range of the number of seats in different parts of the city. And one of the interesting takeaways, we learned a lot from this research, is it turns out the widest array of different kinds of seats was in Northwest Denver, and the lowest array of different types of seats was in Southeast Denver and Southwest Denver. Again, interesting stuff. We're not making any judgment calls around it. We don't know what families want because we didn't look at the demand side. We're only looking at the supply side. And then the other question was sort of how are these different designs? There's lots of perceptions around how different designs do, how they're performing. And so this is, again, the left side is seats. The right vertical chart is percent of seats in green or blue. And so what you see when you look at this is that there isn't a direct relationship to school type and quality, at least based on the SBF overall. We know that if you were to look at this by student group, that it probably would look different. And we haven't done that analysis. That's probably a part 2 analysis. But at least at the overall school level, there are good schools of all different types. And there are poor schools of all different types. So what are we recommending from this? Our general start with the facts recommendations is that, and by the way, we're excited that last night the Denver School Board announced that they're starting a community conversation to get feedback from Denver about the future of Denver. So we're excited that they're moving in that direction. We think there needs to be a new Denver plan, strategic plan, that needs to be clear about goals moving to 2025 and also clear about strategies. Clearly, we're not moving fast enough in terms of improvement. And we need to focus on those those opportunity gaps. The gaps in Denver are totally unacceptable in terms of student performance. And we're also saying that we need to have a new measure of what school quality looks like. The SPF needs to be redesigned. On the unequal choices recommendations, we need to look at clearly what the demand is for different types of schools. If we're to have choice, we need to have real choice. It can't just be choice between two different types of schools in one part of the city. The choice needs to be real, and it needs to meet whatever the demand is. And again, I'm not sure what the demand is, and it may be that in some parts of the city, all we want are comprehensive schools. And in another part of the city, maybe we want more student-centered schools. And that should be informing policy and practices around what kinds of schools we develop and support. And the district should have a plan around that. So I'm going to stop there. So engage the panel, tweet at A+ Colorado and tag #DenverEd. Okay. So let's get started with the panel. This is cool the way you guys can flip around.
Yeah, it is.
So why don't we just do real quick? I'd just like to hear sort of a quick in looking at these reports, what do you think the biggest challenge and opportunity is for DPS moving forward? Who wants to start? Again, short. Barber.
Bring in some outside people to take a fresh look at everything we're doing so that we don't just try and do what we're currently doing better and faster, but we rethink all of our strategies for the next push.
Happy to go.
Okay.
I think the biggest challenge is to provide quality choice throughout the city. And the biggest opportunity is to engage the community in a meaningful dialogue to make that happen.
Angela?
Sure. I think that the biggest challenge and opportunity is around the recommendation to develop a new Denver 2020 plan. When I look around this room, I see a lot of really bright people, but I also see people who are not in this room. And so I think that if we're going to develop a new Denver 2020 plan, we need to pay attention to also the people who are not in these spaces. My aunt is also, I have the pleasure of calling her a constituent. Right now, about this time, she's dropping off my little cousin at school and then going to start one of her many shifts at a fast food restaurant. She's not here, and I would like to know what she thinks about the direction that we're going in as a district. So we need to create a more inclusive public narrative and discourse around what our new 2020 plan is when we enter into that stage.
Teresa?
So over the last 15 years, Denver has changed almost every aspect of any educational policy that we could change. We had student-based budgeting, we've changed governance, we've changed curriculum, we've changed standards and testing. And the one thing that hasn't changed is the outcome for poor and Black and brown kids. And so for me, the biggest challenge, which we've said for the last 15 years, is really the achievement gap in student outcomes. And yet that's the one indicator that has not budged in this school district. I think the challenge is the flip side of that. We've kind of chased the flavor of the month. And I say we, meaning the board that I was on with no statement about our current leaders, who I have only the greatest respect for. Our board chased every single one of those educational aspects. What we lost sight of is kind of the basics. And I would say the basics are really teaching and learning. And it's truly an investment in our teachers. And the one thing we know with certainty across this whole country is that the single most important variable that has the biggest impact on students, regardless of their background, is the teacher. And so the quality of teachers that we put in our classrooms is the most important opportunity I believe the district has. I think we've done a lot. This board has done a lot, leading, I think, on our school leaders. And I think really getting back to the basics. You could put any flavor of the month of these schools up there, but if you don't train the teachers and the leaders in an authentic, really investment resource way, the outcomes won't change for our children.
Great. So how about, how about, why don't we hear from a current board member and a former board member, Nate and Barbara. What do you think DPS is doing well?
Well, going back to Teresa and Nate's time on the board, we have gone from being, I think it's either the worst district in Colorado or the worst large district in Colorado. And I think it's been a gigantic lift to get to average. Who in this room is happy with average? I mean, that's just not what our kids deserve. But it has been a huge lift. And I think where we are now, and I wouldn't say that we're doing it at this moment, but I think the current board is committed to figuring out what needs to be done to take us now for the next push to go from average to the top 25% of all large districts. And I think we know that just trying to execute better on the strategies that we have in place won't be sufficient, which is why we are launching a very intensive citywide listening and conversation effort that will be planned over the summer and launched in the fall to try and get help thinking through the strategies that will help us make that next lift. It's not easy. It's taken 15 years to go from worst to average. So I don't want to belittle the effort it'll take now to make the next move. But we know we can't do it alone, and we know we have to do some self-examination and some thinking about what we put in place, what didn't work so well, and what the community can get behind to help us make that push.
I think, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the school board members who are here and thank you for your service. I really do, from the bottom of my heart, mean that. Most people don't know it's not compensated. When I have more time on my hands, one of the laws I want to deal with, Representative Coleman in the back, because they ought to get something for what they do. It's $1 billion organization, and they should have some time compensated to do the job well. I think what DPS does well is high school graduation is better, and college enrollment is better. As most of you know, 3 out of 4 jobs in the state require some kind of post-high school credential. And DPS has done a much better job of not only getting students to graduate from high school, but having them enroll and not in need of remediation. So the remediation rate is much lower than it was 10 years ago. Something that I think the district, did you ask what could do better? What they can do better?
No, what was doing well?
Just stick on well?
Just
Okay.
stick on well for now. We'll get to the other.
The other thing that I think I can't wait to get to the better. The other thing I think the district is doing well is implementing Colorado law. Not many people realize that the Colorado Choice Act passed in 1990, meaning that a parent can send their kid to any school that they can get them to that has space. And that train left the station in 90. So for those who just say no to choice, that's not the law in our state. Charter law passed in 1993, allowing districts to have that as an option. And the Innovation School Act passed in 2008. So that's the law. I think the district has done a really good job of implementing that law relative to the other 177 school districts in the state.
Great. I'm going to stick to past board members just for one more question. I want to know, you both, Nate and Teresa, you guys were presidents of the board. So what do you regret? What do you wish you had done differently during your reign? I know it's not, I'm being facetious, but what might you have done different, Teresa?
Well, there's a long list of things I would have done different.
Well, just to stick to one or two.
I would say I would not have engaged in closing schools. I would not have closed Manual. I would have not closed Montbello. I would have redone the school performance framework to be more simple and more meaningful. And we did a lot of community engagement. I mean, when I started on the board, we really didn't have community engagement. By the time I left, we had a very robust community engagement. I don't know that community engagement has involved public in public education, however. And I'm still struggling to know who represents our community. So my default will always be the parents. And I think to Angela's point earlier, that's an area that when I was on the board, we did very, very poorly. So that's just a short list of a long list. I do want to say the issues around Manuel Montbello were, and Mary and I were talking about this earlier, which we will always have some disagreement about, but I'm smarter now, that I think it was a good idea that was poorly implemented, that did not have the resources to make it happen, and did not really truly involve the students and parents in a decision that had huge and long-lasting impacts. So while the decision, I think, was right intended, when I look at Montbello and 32 principals in 30 years, I don't know how we couldn't have changed that, and yet the way we did it was so poorly done that I think we did more harm than good on the back end. And so for me, those decisions, with only the best intents, I think created much greater harm because we did such poor implementation.
Nate.
So let me say that the first important thing that I would have done differently is been more polite to my colleagues on the board, whether they agreed with me or disagreed, because this low point that we're at in the United States right now, where Democrats treat Republicans like they're the enemy, and reformers, so-called reformers, treat people who are not reformers like they're the enemy, is stupid. Public education is a cornerstone of our way of life. And if we can't get it right in government, how can we expect our kids to get along? So, I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly apologize to my colleagues who were with me on the board, whom I did not afford the respect that they deserved because they were doing the same thing I was, which is a lot of work for no pay. That being said, I would respectfully disagree with my colleague Teresa. I would have voted to reform Montbello, probably would have done it differently. When you look at the results now, or if you look at results before, 96, 97% of the students who went to college needed remediation. They had 30 or so different principals since I went there in 1980, 81. It was really kind of a bad situation. The numbers were going down. So that had to change. I think I would have changed the language because I think especially for communities of color, we're used to government taking things away from us. And I think I wouldn't use language like close. I would do a better job of engaging with not just the community, but people who trust us with their babies. What do you want in a school? Do you want a football team? Do you want also strong academics? I would also do a combination of allowing them to know what we do well in the district at a much higher rate than we did before, what we're struggling with, and just having an honest dialogue with people. And the fact that, where Montbello ought to be is a place where I feel like I can send my own kids, and until it's there, we want to work with you to improve it. So the question that you all are probably wondering is Montbello at a place where I would send my 10-year-old and 12-year-old? And the answer is absolutely not. And it breaks my heart to say that. It's not just the high school, it's the entire feeder system that I struggle with. And even if I wanted to send my kids, my wife would veto that idea because it's not where it should be. Montbello doesn't have a library, and that's embarrassing. And when I spoke to the community in Montbello and some community leaders, and they started off by saying, we think you're a pariah, but we've talked to you anyway. And I said, okay, let's just move that to the side and have a conversation about how we can do better. I apologize for the condition of the school now. I wouldn't vote to change it because it was in a terrible place, but I would vote to put our best foot forward and provide our best opportunities. And to have a dialogue with parents, real parents, even if we have to go door to door, to say, what do you want? And here's what we do well. And how can we get you some quality choices in this neighborhood? And let's get past the data, statistics, and all that. The kind of place I'd send my own babies.
Great, thank you. One of the things that I was hoping from this conversation was that it would be, I don't want to use this term because some folks use it, no spin zone, but also getting real. And so I want to thank actually all of you for being really direct in the conversation. And one of the challenges then and now is what's a good school and how would you know it? And so, and Denver we have an SPF that is, for all intensive purposes, the answer to that question. And I was wondering, what do you guys think? Should the SPF be changed? And if so, do you have any ideas on how it could?
I think, again, when asking that question, I'm just going to reiterate my prior point about who gets to even have these kinds of conversations and what the baseline understanding of what the SPF is across the board and the lack of understanding. Seeing that I was elected, I think I'm in a position to be able to answer your question, but I do also want to re-emphasize that any kind of conversation around the SPF should be brought in to include all stakeholders. And when I mean all stakeholders, I really do mean people that are not in this room, especially when we talk about we were just looking at the racial gaps that exist across the district. But if you look around this room, it's still pretty white. Like, snaps to all of the people who are of color who are here, and those of you who use your positions in white leadership to elevate the voices of people of color. But I just wanted to, again, use this opportunity to say that when we have that conversation again, which we will, it needs to be a broad and inclusive conversation. Personally, what I would add to the conversation around the SPF and changes to it would be drawing distinctions and drawing very clear purposes about what it is as a tool. Parents, many times from my previous experience as a community organizer, organizing a lot of the parents of actually the students who I taught at the elementary school that I taught at, they utilized the SPF as a tool to determine what schools were quality schools and therefore what schools they wanted to send their children to. At the district, we hear a lot about it being used as a school for tool improvement. After having visited the 50 schools in my district, I hear principals talk about it more from an evaluatory standpoint. And there's one principal who is awesome, she's the principal of Sabin Elementary. She has triplets. All 3 of her children go to her school. We had done a school tour. She's got like 4 or 3 different really intensive SPED programs at her school, really fabulous staff, and was like almost nervous to talk to me about what she was anticipating her SPF to be the next year. And I just thought about the dissonance in that like fear in her voice when I was observing the excellence in her leadership and the wonderful school that she was running. And so those are 3 different purposes in one tool. And I don't think that that accomplishes much. That being said, I think it's important that we do not return to a conversation around we don't need an SPF, because we do. So in summary, what I would say is broaden the conversation of who is even answering the question that you posed in the first place. And then once we do that, identify and delineate clear purposes, and then backwards plan from there.
Great. Other perspectives?
Yeah, one of the things that just drives me crazy about DPS, frankly, is that it is really slow to respond to current situations, whether or not it's who in the room or whether or not it's the tool, the SPF, that's supposed to be guiding our strategies for schools that are struggling. And you know, one of the examples I'll give you is that because of state changes, all sorts of different tests over the past 5 years have been rolled into the SPF with one timeout. I'm not sure we even know if it's capturing quality schools or not. You know, when your parents look at it, I mean, we know there were problems with the early reading scores. And there's so many more elementary schools than anything else. That rolls all sorts of schools up into higher categories. But does that mean they're teaching kids any better or that kids are learning any better? I'll just stick on early reading. We made that the very first year I was on the board one of our priorities. It took 18 months to get a strategic plan on how we would improve early reading. And yet, once we got going with that focus, and I want to thank Susanna for this, but once it got the green light, we got going, we're not seeing those, what was it, 2.5% increases. Last year, we saw 5 or 6. we think we're going to see 5 again. It's double that rate. Still, it'll take 15 years to get to the Denver Plan goal, but nevertheless, to me, it was an illustration of what you can do when you put a focus on something important. Was that driven by the SPF? No, there was almost a complete disconnect. So I know we need a way to evaluate schools, and I know we need a way to tell parents, you have some good options where you live or where you work. But at the moment, I don't think the SPF is driving that conversation because schools bounce up and down, the tests bounce up and down. And I think the only way to get there is to have a community conversation about what's important to people and then figure out what can be reflected in, maybe it's more than one tool. Maybe it doesn't need to all roll up into one Excel spreadsheet. So I don't know how to fix it, but I would love to listen and figure out what's fair and what actually is going to improve teaching and learning.
I would say that the school performance framework is another one of those great Denver ideas, which I think our district does really well in innovation and does really poorly in implementation. And so school performance framework was never intended to be the end, and I feel like, to Angela's point, it has become the end for evaluation or parents. It was a means to evaluate schools and to make it simple for our parents to evaluate schools. And I think it's been co-opted by a bureaucracy that can't help itself with only the best intentions. So I think that the school performance framework really has to be this community parent conversation, which is you have to agree on the problem. So is the problem we have bad schools? Is the problem that we want to evaluate schools? Is the problem we want to evaluate who's teaching in our schools? I think there needs to be this conversation about what problem are we trying to solve, and what is the tool then that helps us to solve that problem. And so I think Angela just listed off 3 problems. I don't know how much consensus there is around that tool and those problems, but I think that's the conversation then that this board leads with our community and our parents to determine how effective that tool is today.
Great. Again, we're excited by your leadership in terms of launching another conversation with the community about hopes and aspirations for children in this city. And I was curious, what are some of your hopes and fears around this? I mean, this isn't the first rodeo in terms of community conversations in Denver.
My hope is that the students in my district are going to be able to grow in tandem with the city of Denver and be drivers of that growth in all aspects that this city has to offer, which I benefited from as a child of Mexican immigrants growing up in Denver. They should be drivers of the creative scene here, of the industry, of the leadership, whatever. And my greatest fear is that we talk about everything that we've been talking about today in terms of gaps, absent of the fact that our students, especially our students of color, don't exist in a vacuum inside of school. They exist in larger political structures, which they battle every single day. Clear example, and I hope that you hear the frustration in my voice. My little cousin, who's also my constituent, is continuating from her middle school today. She is the featured continuation speaker. I helped her with her continuation speech. It was already great. No surprises there. She talked about how at the very beginning of her middle school career, she realized that she wanted to continuate with high honors, but that she was at about a C average and she needed to work harder to do it. So here she is continuating on to 9th grade with distinction, with high honors in a very challenging, rigorous school. And yet, when she turns 15 or 16 and should be eligible for deferred action for childhood arrivals, given the state of our national politics, she isn't. So what good is it that she's excelling on the NAEP scores and hitting all her map tests and whatever, right? Because she doesn't exist in a vacuum where all that matters are those scores. She's still subject to the larger political structures that our society lives in. And it frustrates me that we have these conversations without talking about that, or without talking about something like housing. How am I supposed to look at a strategic regional analysis that projects declining enrollment in my area due to displacement of families and low birth rates and accept that? I'm just supposed to be like, oh yeah, I guess we should start having a community conversation about what happens when people leave their apartments because they can't afford the escalating rents. I've moved around since I graduated from college 7 years ago. I've moved every single year. And if I'm doing that as an upwardly mobile Latina, imagine the people like my families or like my students. So I think that my biggest fear is that we continue to have these conversations with the same people in these rooms and absent of larger political systems that affect our kids every single day.
Thanks. Other hopes and fears around the community conversations?
Yeah. When we started talking about the need for meaningful community conversations, one of the things we talked about was how do you get our own accountability so that you're not just reading your own SPFs as a school board and as an administration of DPS. And what would be one way to get feedback on how we're performing and what we're doing and how our actions match up with what the community that uses the schools and loves their kids in their schools, how do we get that? And so part of it is to, have the courage to listen to criticism about where we've placed our big bets that things would get better. Sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't, but to actually hear feedback about how we're doing and how we're implementing the things that always have good ideas about them, and yet we've somehow failed to follow through. And I think we and the senior team within DPS, I think we all need to hear some feedback on our own performance, and we're open to that. But I also hope what will come out of this is on that earlier chart where it showed Colorado way behind on NAEP and Denver sort of in the middle of the pack. Why is it that New York City, every big city has kids facing DACA challenges, facing housing mobility? Why is it that we, and I mean Denver public schools, but also the city and county of Denver, why is it that other places manage to overcome some of those barriers and we don't? And I would love to understand why we don't break through that complex web of challenges that face kids and families when there's evidence that it's possible to do that. Which brings me back to why are we so slow to react? So that's what I hope to get out of it.
Either of you have anything to weigh in on this?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'd like to say ditto to what Barber and Angela just said. Very well said. I hope that DPS can learn how to be the kind of district that can surface what it does really well and build on that, and surface what opportunities we have and build on it. Let me give you an example. I've had the pleasure of living in another country, and I know what it feels like when you don't speak the language. You don't lose your sense of humor. You don't lose your intelligence. You don't lose anything. You just don't speak German. I hope that I live to see a day when we can use language like bilingual instead of ELA or ELL, which I see as objectifications of people who speak two languages. In most part of the so-called developed world, if you speak one language, you're illiterate, right? And so we take people who come to the classroom with two languages, we objectify them, and we remediate them. That's crazy. So I hope we figure out a way to build on the talents of the beautiful kids that we're trusted with and to build on the things that we do well. There are some schools that work. There are some teachers who are knocking it out of the park. In fact, I think the highest paid employee in the district should be a math teacher in 3rd grade who's getting her kids unlevel, or should be a reading teacher that's beating the odds, right? Just like you would if you had a football team. It's not the coach that gets the most money. It's that amazing quarterback. Okay, so I hope we learn how to build on our strengths, because in public education, we're really good at talking about how we suck, and we're really good at talking about, even worse, how our kids suck. We're really good at talking about how our schools suck. Who wants to work in an environment like that? So I hope we get better at surfacing what we do well. I also hope we learn how to use and. I grew up with conjunction, junction, what's your function? And the 3 main conjunctions are and, but, and or. In education, we are really good at but. I would love to teach Nate math, but his mama doesn't send him to school. All right? We're really good at or. I love to figure out a way to provide quality charter schools, or I would love to figure out a way to provide quality neighborhood schools. Or no. It's about and. So we need to learn how to say yes and, not but or. Because if we can't get it together, folks, our future is dark. We live in a state that doesn't fund education. If we don't do something about Tabor, 60% of the school districts in this state have a 4-day school week. Not because 4 days is better for kids, because 4 days is all they can afford. And you don't think that's coming to Denver? We're sitting here smacking each other and not figuring out how to do something about Tabor? I hope we can get our thing together so we can do something better. And to Angela's point, some of the most talented students I've ever had the opportunity to work with in my entire life were students who qualified for deferred action, were DACA kids. And before that, they were undocumented kids. We're a country of immigrants. We have a federal government that is basically changing that and openly doing it. And instead of us trying to figure out how we can come together as a city and support the mayor in his efforts to be a so-called sanctuary city, we're smacking each other around. So I hope we can get our stuff together so we can think about the fact that our kids don't exist in a vacuum, and we can battle as a city for some of our most talented people.
Great. Thank you. Before I go to Teresa, I just want to plug. Folks say, oh, it's impossible to pay folks 6 figures who are the math teachers in 3rd grade, given the budget that Denver Public Schools has. It isn't. We actually did a report last year, and we showed how it could be done. So check it out. It's on our website.
What's the name of the report?
Oh, sorry. It's a fair share. Sorry, a fair share on our website, apluscolorado.org. And if there's more money, you can pay folks even more. So, Teresa.
I'm going to leave it where Nate left it.
Okay, great. Okay. I want to go to the second report, Unequal Choices. What do you guys think? Are there the right diversity of school options in terms of program options, school designs in Denver and different parts of the city? How's DPS doing on that?
I'll start. I love the idea that parents have choice, but I think choice is meaningless unless it's quality choice. I am fortunate enough to live in an area of Denver where I have quality choice. So I sit on the board of Denver School of Science and Technology, which has the highest test scores for African Americans in the state of any public school. And so I happen to be the father of 2 African American boys. And given the statistics, I wanted them to go to DSST. My son and my wife trumped me and said, no, we're going to go to a different school. But that choice, McCullough, was a quality choice. And so my son, who goes to McCullough, he's going into 7th grade. He plays football. He plays the violin. He took Chinese. He took Mandarin. He took robotics. He's a very good kid. He's taller than me. I think that's probably something they did at McCullough. And so it had to be. They come from my side of the family.
They do have high growth scores.
They do have high growth scores. Thank you,
Good.
But my sister lives in Montbello, and she has 5 kids. And there are some quality choices in Montbello, but they're limited. They're much more limited than what I have, and it's just not right. And so I would say that we absolutely have to do a better job of choice. I don't agree with Secretary DeVos that choice is a good thing unless it's quality. If you give me a choice between going to jail or going to hell, which is what a lot of people who look like me have that choice, black boys who drop out of school, black boys who drop out of school are 60%. 60% of them end up in prison. Black boys who drop out of school, 60% of the time end up in prison. I have 5 nephews in prison, okay? If my choice is going to jail or getting shot and going to hell because I was gangbanging or something like that, that's not choice. It has to be quality choice. And I know what that is because I have it.
So I just want to support what Teresa said earlier. I do believe parents should have options. I had 2 boys with ants in their pants, and they would have done terribly in an IB program. And back then, schools weren't as crowded, and it was easy to get them into a different school where there was more room for boys with ants in their pants. So I understand the need to match students with schools that will work for them. But in Denver, the pattern has been that innovative models that are standalones fare very poorly in terms of student achievement. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's a lack of supports, although the supports we give traditional district schools don't always make a huge difference either. So this is one of those things where I think it's actually very complicated. But we know that good teachers that get the kind of professional development that they need to themselves move to the next level in their teaching are going to make a difference for students, whatever model they're in. So I don't want to be distracted by this shiny model of just different models. We want to make sure that the teaching and learning is really high quality no matter what the school is, and to keep our eye on that particular ball.
Great. Any other thoughts?
I would just add that, again, I think we need to ask ourselves the collective question, is school choice the means or the end? If it's the end, A+. DPS has done a fabulous job at choice. If it is a means to higher student achievement, we get an F. So what is the problem we're trying to solve? Do we want schools across the whole district, or do we want high outstanding student achievement? Do we want students college ready when they graduate or not? And is this the means or the ends? So I'm a lot less interested in where the schools are and how effectively or equitably they are distributed. I'm a lot more interested in the quality of schools in the neighborhoods where our children and families reside. And if that's our goal, we have failed.
I think what I would add to this conversation is that we can't discuss the diversity of school models or the lack of diversity of school models absent of the kinds of access to capital for those schools. For example, in my district, I have a magnet art school. That magnet art school does not have access to the same kind of capital that the Denver School of the Arts does. And that is a disservice to the children in my neighborhood. I do think that it's important to have diverse school models because children are all different. Like Barbara mentioned, I saw it in my own classroom when I taught students. And what I loved about my school is that we were able to offer enrichments every Friday that were teacher taught and the kids got to pick, which was really an enjoyable experience. I think it also did increase student achievement in my classroom because there was a lot of investment for those enrichments. But also, as I visit the schools in my neighborhood, there are schools that don't, again, have access to enrichment opportunities. And a lot of the times we use diverse school models as a proxy for opportunities, but there are schools that are doing a really good job without having a flashy kind of model. One of my favorite schools in my district is Knapp Elementary. It's right by the parish that I grew up in, really strong school leader, some of the best instruction that I've seen in my district, but they have a really hard challenge being able to maintain their after-school programs. And the parents in my district have talked to me at length about how they need after-school opportunities. And that's just after-school opportunities. We're not talking about after-school enrichments. So I think access to capital and to be able to sustain diverse school program models so that they can get better, so that we can see under a considerate amount of time whether or not they have a correlation with student achievement is important. The elementary school that I went to, one of the elementary schools that I went to, CMS Community School, does a one-way dual language program, which is awesome because it's, to Nate's point, capitalizing and leveraging Spanish as an asset for Spanish-speaking students. I would love to see programs like that in Northeast Denver, where I taught, where instead of thinking about dual language as something that we can do for Latino and white kids, we should be able to do that for Latino and Black kids. Our Black kids should be able to leverage the assets that our Spanish-speaking students have, and our Spanish-speaking Latino students should be able to leverage the assets that our Black students have. And so I think that when we think about a diversity of school models, we need to think about the sustainability of funding for those, the types of enrichment opportunities that they offer, especially when thinking about a whole child lens, and also leveraging assets.
Great, thank you. So folks, go to your phones, go to Twitter, so we can have some questions in a second. I just have one last question for the panelists. So it's September of next year, it's 2019. We have another school board election. And my guess is that a number of folks and a number of you will be engaged in one way or another in that school board election. And you may have candidates that you're supporting. And it seems far away, but it's not. And I was curious, what's the message that your candidate, your imaginary candidate in 2019, is going to be saying about Denver Public Schools?
So I'm a member of an organization called Education Leaders of Color. It's a national organization that rejects the binary of, oh, you're a reformer or you're not a reformer. I've had a lifetime of people putting me into boxes that I didn't decide. And so the idea of the organization is that you create a third way, combining your experience as a person of color in public education with reform ideas. It's a lot more ground up than what we do now and what we have done. And also doesn't totally reject the things that people who are not reformers say. We actually listen. And so, at least in the ideal sense. So in 2019, my ideal candidate is also espousing a third way, is trying to build bridges, because as my colleagues on this panel have said previously, we do not have the time or the luxury to continue to engage in battles on Facebook. I stay off of Facebook because, again, I don't have the time. And I know that it sounds funny, but I found out recently about something horrible that happened to one of my former students. And so when I think about the time that we waste and the money that we waste engaging in these kinds of divisive and oftentimes racist battles, having had my face slapped next to Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump. And then I hear about what my students are enduring as they're just trying to make their way to and from school. And I just want to reject that, and my future candidate in 2019 does too.
Awesome.
If I had an opportunity to run again, this is the way I'm thinking about it. If I ran again, what would be my campaign? My first thing to say, and this isn't all that exciting, is I would demonstrate that I knew what the hell I was doing. I thought I spent 11 years in DC, so what could a school board be, right? I knew nothing about what I was signing up for. There are a lot of good policies at DPS. There are a lot of brilliant people, a lot more brilliant than me, who served on the board. I would say that anyone who wants to run for school board ought to read those policies. Americans hate reading. We really do. We'd much rather do a snippet on Facebook or on TV. But I would say read the policies and know what the law says, because that is law for DPS. And then figure out how you're going to build on the brilliance that was already there, as opposed to do something that's already been tried. I read Rachel Knoll's resolution to desegregate the schools, and the premise that she lays out in the late 60s. If you read that, it's scary how we're still dealing with the same issues of segregated schools. So that would be my first thing, is to read and be informed and run as somebody who knows what the hell they're talking about and what they're signing up for. The second thing is I would run on a great schools campaign, great public schools campaign. And by the way, charters are public schools. So I try to get rid of the bifurcation between district school and neighborhood schools. I agree with Angela. It's about great schools. When I go to figure out what school my kid goes to, my first question is, what is your governance style? My first question is, are you going to teach my Black Jewish boys how to read, write, and do arithmetic? I could care less how it's governed, right? So let's get rid of these false distinctions and just talk about great schools. I would run on a campaign where it was clear that I represented the people to the district and not the reverse, and especially as it comes to creating more great schools.
It's unbelievable the things you're supposed to vote on that you know nothing about once you get on a school board. I mean, it's scary. It's kind of like the legislature. I remember in the I mean, no offense. The first year I was on the board, we were supposed to vote on what % of funding for a firehouse we were going to contribute to the city. So there would be a firehouse within whatever the recommended minutes to a school would be, and there was sort of a firehouse desert in one part of town. Like, okay, that's not why I ran, but you need to do it. So I would be looking for someone who has a passion about something that's positive and that would benefit students. For me, it was getting kids off to a good start in elementary school, but it's other things for other people. I just admire passion. And then I would ask them, are you curious enough to learn about different parts of the city? This for me, it would be an at-large candidate. You have to be so curious about other parts of the city that you've been to but you've never lived in, and make sure that you're really working with a citywide vision of where the schools fit into the fabric of life in Denver City and County. And I would then look at a person's values. Do they have integrity? Are they honest? Are they open? Would I trust them to make the very best decision they could without being whipsawed by the Facebook battles and all of that? And then I would want to help them craft a campaign that somehow tapped into who they really were and the values and character and passion they would bring to the position, and communicate that I had 35 public forums because of an at-large race, to communicate that in 35 forums in every corner of the city, and know enough about where you are to try and connect with people who live there and work there. I would be looking at the quality of the person and helping them try and articulate who they are so they could get elected and take that to a board and then find a way to build bridges for the future.
Teresa?
So I would agree with absolutely everything my three colleagues have said, and I feel like we're getting to a more and more narrow group of people who want to serve in this highly paid volunteer position that takes, if you do it really well, a significant amount of your personal time. I think for me, the single most important indicator of whoever would like to talk to me about running for the school board is that we have to pick one thing and we're going to do it really well. And for me, that has to be we're going to close the achievement gap. That living in Denver, as a Denver native, as a third generation education professional, it exhausts me to think that we still have a 45-point gap whether we measure it by black or brown or by income, that I can't believe I live and love a city that does this to our children. This is not a value that I have ever espoused. I don't think anybody does, and yet we have tolerated this for well over 50 years. So the one thing I want that person to do is pick one thing and we're going to be good at it. It's either the achievement gap or it's college readiness. Because if you're college ready, everybody has a play. If you're an ECE teacher, that kid is done with ECE mastery at the end of ECE. If you're a third grade math teacher, your kid knows third grade math. We don't do that. So the second piece, you pick that one goal. For me, it's the achievement gap. And the second thing is you hold yourself, your colleagues, and the senior leadership team accountable. Because in this district, no one's really accountable for that gap. I wasn't, my board wasn't. There was no consequence to me running for my second term that we didn't move that gap, that we didn't eliminate it. So the great news is that all children in Denver are doing better. The really terrible news is our black and brown and minority kids, who are soon to be a minority in this school district, are doing a lot worse. Maybe not a lot worse. They're certainly not doing better. And it's been for 50 years. And what exhausts me is that we don't have a city that's outraged by that fact.
Great, thank you. Let's see how technology works. Oh, it looks like you have some questions.
We have a ton of questions from the audience, and there's been a lot of questions about family and community engagement. It's a recommendation. You all spoke eloquently about it. So I think there's a lot of asks about what does it look like to have authentic and meaningful family and community engagement that not only recognizes diverse viewpoints and diversity within communities, but goes beyond engagement toward rebuilding trust between DPS and people.
So what's the question?
The question is, what does that look like?
What does what look like?
Meaningful family engagement that recognizes diverse viewpoints and perspectives and restores trust and builds trust between DPS and people.
So this week we had a board retreat, and at the board retreat we were provided with a continuum of family engagement, which I would encourage everybody to look at. I'm going to try to remember everything that was on the continuum. But what was important was not necessarily what was on the continuum, but the fact that based on the purpose of your organization's mode to engage community, there is a type of community engagement process that aligns to that. So when you say community engagement, that can mean a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people. So on that continuum, is your purpose to inform communication? Is your purpose to get input? Is your purpose to consult communities? Or is your purpose to empower communities? And then based off of that, you should clearly communicate what your objective is and backwards plan a process that is aligned to that purpose. Part of what we talked about in that retreat is often that there is a miscommunication about what the purpose of that engagement is, and therefore we have misaligned processes to achieve that. So Landon, if you could read again the purpose that was outlined in that question, it was to regain trust.
Meaningful and authentic engagement to rebuild trust.
I would differentiate those and contextualize them. If it's in a school design process, again, that bears different types of community engagement. If it's to rebuild a lot of legitimate relationships between the district and the community, which I think we see in far northeast Denver, which we really, really need to do. I think that what we need to acknowledge is that that's going to take time. And many times in education, we're like, oh, well, we're going to do this community engagement thing for 3 or 4 weeks, and then we will have done it, and we can check off that box. But what has happened in Northeast Denver is a great example of the history and the historical relationships between the district and the city, for better or for worse. And I think that with community engagement, it's always better to go slow so that you can go fast later on based on what you're trying to achieve. So I said a lot of different things. What I can do tangibly is share that continuum with you, and then you can post it or something.
Great.
One of the things that drives the current model of family or community engagement in DPS is when something needs to be done. So there's a need to figure out something about a school or a housing issue, whatever it is, but it's very task-oriented. And I understand how busy everyone who works in DPS, how they all are the time. They have unbelievably gigantic jobs. So I'm describing something that might not be humanly feasible given people need to survive their jobs. But we have to find a way to listen when there's time to listen and build relationships, and not when we just need to make a decision. And then sometimes we didn't give ourselves enough time and it kind of gets forced, and then people feel that they weren't heard. And I think a lot of the mistrust comes, as Angela was describing, out of a process that isn't, it doesn't fit the moment or the need. And we have to figure out how to find the time to be more outward facing in the work that we do, and have engagement just be part of the air we breathe instead of something we plan for and have a PowerPoint for and have a room reserved, and make it more a part of an organic way of not only solving the problems that are in front of us, like opportunity gaps, but also listening to things that might be emerging that we hadn't thought about, but we're there and we're listening and we're talking. So a more organic approach to it, and knowing that that's harder to do than I would have imagined before I got on the board, because I know the crazy things that come at the people in DPS who are in charge of family and community engagement.
I think it's important in trust, first of all, ditto, to make sure that the people you're engaging are empowered to know what you're engaging them about, okay? It's really easy this is my 30th year promoting educational opportunity. So it's really easy for me to use my PhD to talk over somebody's head and to make myself sound really smart. But the very first step in gaining trust is to shut the hell up and listen. Genuine, active listening, okay? I think the next step to move from engagement to empowerment is to be honest about what the guardrails are. Be honest about what the non-negotiables are.
Yeah.
To go to a parent who's low income and say, what kind of school do you want? That's probably not the best way. I think my mother would just say one that my kid could go to that's close, right? And it's not because she was a bad mom. My mom engaged me a lot, right? And she engaged me in ways that she knew how to engage me, right? So she probably would have said, it needs to be close and it needs to be convenient, right? But she needed to be empowered to know that when I graduated from Montbello, I was one of Montbello's top math students, and I tested remedial my freshman year at Colorado State. And being one of the only black people, I was the only black history major on the campus the year I went there. I was like Tigger, he's the only one. I was like the only one, okay? And then first I thought I wanted to be an engineer. I didn't become a historian until I found out I was stupid in math, right? I almost left, right? That is a story that's shared by so many students who came up the way I did. My mother didn't want that, right? So she had to be empowered to know what was and what wasn't happening, not just in Montbello High School, but from Barney Ford all the way up. So to have a real trust relationship, I have to empower you. And with all due respect, I think it's difficult for the district to do that. I think there needs to be a parent empowerment effort. It could be one organization, there's several, that just looks out for the interest of parents as it relates to getting the best school for their kid. That's all they do. Put them on an even ground when they're talking to the school district about the best school for their baby.
Great. Let's go to Twitter for some more.
So this picks up on a thread Teresa talked about the tension between.
You have to speak up.
This pulls on a thread Teresa talked about. That's the tension between more diverse options and high quality options. And so, Barber spoke to a need for focus. So how do we reconcile both a need for more diversity in the system and for more high quality options?
Anyone?
So if that was for me, my only point is that I'm a lot less interested in the diversity and equitable distribution of those options because I think it's a means to an end, and so the end is student achievement. So my big solution is, I'm going to sound like a broken record, it's you hire the best teachers, you identify what they are the best at, and you continuously support their development. So we're a continuous learning organization, and maybe the one team that gets the least amount of relevant and rigorous professional development is our teachers. So I think that for me, it's less about the option. I think it goes back to the conversations that this board will have with the community and with parents. What do you want in your neighborhood? And then if we agree as a district to follow through on those models, that we invest accordingly. And I think the best investment, the best place of resources is through the development of our teachers, hiring the best one. So I can think of 5 different models we approved, IB, Montessori, dual language, and we never fully invested in the school leader or the staff in those schools to make that happen. So I would honestly prefer to have fewer options of models available across the school district and do fewer really, really well.
So I'm going to say yes and. So yes to what Teresa said, and also it's important to have high quality options. So for example, if you're white and your kids do not qualify for free or reduced meals, as you saw from the data, your kids are performing well. And in fact, they're more likely to enroll in college at the national rate. They're more likely to graduate if they go to college at the national rate. And if I'm a low-income person of color, I want that same thing. Affluent families have choice. I don't know how many people that I've spoken to in this city who are affluent, and I say, do you send your kids to the public school system? No, I send them to Grayland. No, and these are people of color, right? So why shouldn't low-income families have that same option? If we want to have a system where it's the communist system, where everything is controlled by the government, and everybody has the same choice, so thou shalt send their kid to a public school, I'm down for that, right? If every person in this room had no choice but to send their kids to DPS, I'm down for that, right? But when you have this thing where wealthy people have choice and low-income people do not have choice, I'm not down for that, right? So my thing is, everyone should have quality choice. I have no right to have the choices that I have in Stapleton if I'm not fighting for my sister in Montbello.
Can I just say one more
Sure.
thing? It's an extension of that. Doesn't actually answer the question. But it's been in the public discourse recently also about how white families are utilizing, or middle to high income families, could be white, could not be white, are utilizing school choice to their advantage. What I wanted to say to that is an extension of what Nate just said is that's not new. They've been doing that for ages. And I just wanted to contextualize that and also refer everybody to the Denver Post, or maybe it was Rocky Mountain News article about white flight in Denver after the desegregation of our schools. Just to put that into the historical context.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
So we have a question about this new strategic engagement process the district's about to go on to. And I think there's some wondering, is this the intention to build a new Denver plan? And if so, is there a way that we can make the Denver plan more adaptive and ongoing in dialogue with the community versus a static document?
I do not think that we are at the point where we are able to answer that question. We literally met this week to start talking about, like, in the vision setting stage of, like, what would we want to see? And I don't think that, well, unless Barbara, would you say that we're able to answer that question?
No, I mean, we just didn't get that far, although I do have something I would love to add when you're finished.
I'm done.
Okay. As I said at the beginning of this panel, what we've done for 15, 20 years has moved us from worst in the state to middle of the pack. And I think we're all hoping from this serious commitment to listening and talking that we are going to get ideas about things we can do that can help us make the very next push that will benefit all of the students. To me, that would be keeping the goals of the Denver plan. Who doesn't want kids to read in elementary school? Who doesn't want more kids to graduate ready for whatever they want after high school. So I don't think those fundamentals of a good public education system will end up, we won't hear that those are the wrong goals, but they're not sufficient for getting us to where we need to be and to make the next push. So that's what I'm hoping to learn.
And then that just made me realize I should say one other thing. I think in terms of the process that you'll see, so which doesn't get to your question about the outcome, is that it's going to be reflective of the people who are on the current school board. Jennifer Bacon, who's in the back, and our dear colleague Carrie Olson, who's not here. One of my favorite things about even just having the kind of high-level conversations about what these conversations will look like was the dialogue going back and forth across the room with the people who are on your current school board. I know the question was a while back about ideal candidates, but Carrie Olson, she's not here, but everybody should have coffee with her. And everybody should talk to her and learn from her, including myself. And also Jennifer Bacon.
Great.
And also Enro. And everybody.
And me.
And Barbara.
But I have already.
And Angela. Thanks. We have time for one more question.
So I think there's a lot of questions in the Twitterverse, if that's a thing, around what's the big thing that DPS is going to need to do differently moving forward? Because there's been a lot of discussion, but what's that big thing that they're going to have to do differently to unlock all the promise that we believe is possible?
I'd say be honest about what you can do better. There's no need to hide from it. I'm never going to dunk a basketball, let's face it. It's just not going to happen. But if that's something I had to do, I could try. I could learn how to use a trampoline. I could negotiate with the NBA, right? I could do better every week. I think the pretty language needs to stop, and what we do well, we can be honest about that. And what we're really not doing well, let's be honest about the fact that we can do better.
I'll say that when we focus, we see real progress for kids. We see great feedback from a lot of teachers that they're loving the profession of teaching now more than they have in 2 decades because of different opportunities to lead in their schools. So when we focus, we get good results. The tendency is to chase after shiny objects and to not, this is so boring, but to not execute well. I think we've got to get past this chasing the shiny object and focus on some key things that will benefit kids and teachers, and then implement, and come up for air and see where we are, and then learn and go forward harder.
Great.
I just want to add
Okay.
one thing. I would say 10 years ago, our focus was with the student in the center of all of our decisions. So every decision that our board made was surrounded by that. I think that has to change right now. I think the center of the DPS universe has to be our teachers, because we know that that will have the greatest impact on our kids. So I think that every decision that we make going forward has to really be around how effective, how helpful, how valuable is that for our teachers who are in our classrooms.
Can you join me in thanking Van, Landon, and Lisa for a great forum and for keeping that dialogue going?
Thank you. I want to thank such a remarkable group of former and current school board members. Such amazing wisdom, leadership, and with a huge action orientation. We need more of this. We need more public dialogue like this. We need more reflection, and we need more honesty about it. And I couldn't thank you more. Thank you so much. Have a great day.